Welcome back to another episode of English with Chris. And today we're going to keep going down the journey through auxiliaries that we started for this little grammar series that I put together. And today we are going to look at a really special one, actually, because this one's a little bit different. And this is the exception to the rule that I introduced before, although it still works, it's just a little different. And so this is be auxiliary or be verb, okay? Now, when you learn it in your textbooks, I know it's referred to as verb to be or be verb, but really it's both. And that's the special thing about be in English. And so we're gonna look at a few things today. We're going to go through an overview, and then I'm going to look at the structure, past and present, although these two sections will be a little similar. In the first section, I'm going to show you sort of how it's a little bit different from the normal style, using some easy examples. And then we'll look at the structure of both past and present, be verb, be auxiliary, be verb. And then we'll look at the meaning and examples, because you know me, meaning is the most important. And with some examples, some nice easy examples, I hope that you can understand how be verb or be auxiliary verb works in English, because it's both. So let's find out how. So let's look at the overall structure of be auxiliary verb. And I'm going to show you how it's actually both of these things at the same time, okay? And that's what makes it really special. In the past videos, and if you haven't watched those, it's a good idea to go back, maybe review them or watch them before you watch this, because otherwise it might be a little confusing. The videos are meant to be watched in order. So if you've watched the previous videos, then this will be very familiar with you for you, but the be itself is going to be a little different. So as always in English, there are four parts to each sentence. We have the subject, the auxiliary verb piece, and the object, okay? So with be auxiliary verb, we're going to use the basic subjects, and the object for be is always a noun. And so we're just going to use some simple nouns, a teacher and a student, okay? So if you look at the first one, it says, I am a teacher. And you might think, well, what's the verb? Well, the verb is am. That's what most people say. However, the verb is actually, and this is how you have to think of it, there's two things here. The verb is actually be, because that's its natural form. That's its root form, okay, is be, be. And you can see that more clearly in this one here. I will be a teacher. Okay, so if we ask what's the verb in that one, well, that's very obvious, right? It's this be right there, okay? And so if you look down here to the second one, you are a student. I've changed the color a little bit because it'll help you see it a little better. This little e, you can consider that the verb be, okay? And then again, you will be a student is a little more clear that be is the verb. So be is a verb. However, if you look, we have a spelling change. And we talked about spelling change in the video about simple past. And even, you know, simple present, do, does do, has a spelling change. Does run, runs. We get that S. Or did run, ran, R-A-N, and we talked about that in the last video. And it's the same thing here. So what's happening is the auxiliary is a meaning and the verb is a meaning. And again, they join together to create action in reality or in perspective, so that we can use these verbs more clearly in English. So be is the verb, the meaning is represented by the auxiliary, the spelling change. So am is the auxiliary, and they are both at the same time, okay? Even though you can't really see the be anymore because the spelling change is, you know, pretty big here, Okay, down here, you are. The spelling change is a little bit easier because you just have the AR, and so that could be considered the auxiliary meaning, and they're joined together, okay? So they're both at the same time. That's what makes be verbs special. With do, and does do, and did do, we already talked about them. You can put them together, you can separate them. I can say I did go, or I can say I went. I can say I do go, or I can say I go. Okay, and so you can put them together, you can separate them. This one is special because once you put them together, you cannot separate them. So this is now inseparable. You cannot pull them apart. So this becomes the auxiliary, which means when you do things like add the negative, we talked about that, the negative always joins, I'll just erase this part, the negative always joins with the auxiliary. So I am not a teacher. Or if we're going to make the question, we talked about that before, you move the auxiliary. Now here's the interesting part. In the past, when we move the auxiliary, you take it away from the verb and you put it in the front. So I can say, he runs every day, and then the S, does he run every day? But for this one, you cannot separate them. So when you move the auxiliary, you also move the verb at the same time. So you're kind of bringing them both doing it, which is the difference between normal, like here, I will be a teacher. When we put the negative, it's going to go in for will, I will not, because the negative joins with the auxiliary. But then when we move to make the question, we just move will. Will I be a teacher? Okay, so be auxiliary verb is special because it's both of those things at the same time. And when you move them around, you have to move them together. Same thing down here, right? You are a student, the negative comes in, you are not a student, and then if we want to make the question, we have to move both of them together. Are you a student? Which is different from here. If we want to put the negative, it would come in down, you will not be a student, because the negative always connects to the auxiliary. And then if we wanted to make the question, we just move this piece. Will you be a student? And so when we think about be, it's really important to remember that it has two functions at the same time, two parts. It's the auxiliary and the verb at the same time. And actually it's funny because when you guys learn grammar in the grammar books, they call this SVO, subject, verb, object. And this is the grammar that you learn for everything else. But it actually only works, and I don't even like it, I'm going to erase it. It only works for this one, right? And which is why it doesn't work for I will be a teacher or I should be a teacher. Those ones have a different form, which is represented with this formula up here. Okay, so that is the basic structure. And that's the difference between be auxiliary verb and the other auxiliaries in English. In the next part, we're going to look at the past and the present structure of be verb a little more closely. So join me in the next part. Okay, so in this part, we are going to look more closely at the past and the present be auxiliary verb and how it works in this system so that you can understand it a little better. Okay, so remember what we talked about in the last part is that be auxiliary verb are the same thing. They join together and then they never separate, that you cannot take them apart. Okay, so let's start with the present over here because it's a good place to start. So first sentence, this is normal meaning, right? We talked about in the past videos, normal, emphasis, negative, and the question. Well, here normal and emphasis, so normal and emphasis, are the same. They are students, or you can use your voice. They are students, right? You can get a little stronger, okay? They're the same sort of meaning as simple present, or do and does do when you do this. And we'll talk about meaning in the next one. But you know, you're talking about truth. Again, truth about your life, okay? So they are students, or their life, okay? They are students. And you can see, again, what's the verb? Well, the verb is be. And the auxiliary is are. It's the spelling change. A-R-E is different, right? So it's actually marked. You can see it. You can see the change. And so you know it's the auxiliary. If you were a pirate, you could say they be students. And in some places they would do that. They would just use the verb they be students, I be a student. You hear that sometimes. It's not common, obviously, because most of the time we change the verb be into the auxiliary are, and that's how we use it. Okay. If you want to add the negative always joins with the auxiliary. They are not students. And again, if you're going to make the question, you would change the auxiliary and the subject like that. Now, again, with be, you're moving the auxiliary and the verb at the same time, but you're still doing the same thing that we talked about in the original videos. You're just doing it with both pieces instead of just one, okay? Here's another example down here. She is my cat. And so if I was to ask you, what is the verb? Well, the verb is be. This is be verb right here. But the auxiliary is, because we have to change the spelling, which shows meaning, truth about my life in the present, okay? Or now, right? Truth about life now for me, she is my cat, okay? So again, with the auxiliary, you want to add the negative. So she is not my cat. And then to make the question, you simply change the subject and the auxiliary. But with be verb, you have to remember that the verb and the auxiliary cannot be separated. You cannot take them apart. And so they follow each other. The verb follows the auxiliary through the grammar, which is different from what we talked about before. But this is the only one that does this, is be. Okay, so you can remember this is a very special case, and so it's different from all the other kinds of auxiliaries. Okay, if we look at it in the past, it's the same thing. So he was in the car, past truth, similar to did do. He was in the car is a truth about the past. Okay, so what's the verb here? Well, the verb is be. Again, the auxiliary is the spelling change, was, W-A-S. And so that shows action in reality. Okay, the perspective is past truth. He was in the car. Not anymore, but he was. Okay, if you want to emphasize it, this is normal emphasis or strong. He was in the car, right? And then, of course, we keep going. The negative always connects to the auxiliary. He was not in the car. And then to make the question, you just switch the auxiliary and the subject. But remembering that be, the verb goes with it, because they are, once they join together, once you change it, you can never change it back. That's what's special about be auxiliary verb. Okay, and then the last example, they were surprised, and I changed the color of the E just to kind of make it look a little, the same one here, right? You can see the E as kind of represents, it shows the verb as it's moving together, right? So this one and this one kind of give you the visual of the verb and the auxiliary moving together through. We can draw the arrows like this, right? Moving together through, because they become one piece and you cannot take them apart. With the other auxiliaries, you can put them together, take them apart. Did run, ran. Did walk, walked. Do run, run. Does run, runs. Right? And so you put them together, take them apart, and move the auxiliary around by itself. But be auxiliary verb, they're stuck together. You have to move them together. So here we go. They were surprised. What's the verb? Well, the verb is be. And the auxiliary is the spelling change. Were. They were surprised. Past truth. Okay? If I want to add the negative, it joins on to the auxiliary. They were not surprised. And then to switch the subject to make the question, were they surprised? And then again, for the answers to all these questions, and we talked about this before with do and does do and did do. So if I said, did you do your homework? You can say, yes, I did. No, I didn't. Did you study? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Do you run? Yes, I do. No, you don't. Okay, so same thing here, right? Was he in the car? Yes, he was. No, he wasn't. So you're using the auxiliary to make the answers, the short answers to these as well. And so you can see, even though it's a little bit different from what we talked about, this is the only one that does this. And so this is the exception to the rule. But it still moves through the sentence in a very similar way. It just drags the verb with it. It takes the verb with it so that they're moving together. So in the last part, we'll just look at some examples to highlight the meaning a little bit. And I already talked about the meaning just slightly in this one, but we will just look at it with a few simple examples in the last part of this video. So join me there. Welcome to the last part of this video, and we're just going to talk about the meaning and with a couple easy examples to sort of show that meaning for you guys today. And so the meaning for be auxiliary verb, or be auxiliary, if you just want to call it that, is the same as simple present. So do and does do for the present. And so we can just write that here. It's very similar to do and does do. And over here, it's very similar to did do. Okay? And if you can remember from those videos, do or simple present means truth about life or truth about the general world. And so that exists in the present, right? So we use it to show that these things are true about my life or your life or life in general or the world around us, okay? And so some examples of that, and the first one shows that I'm a Star Wars fan. So I am your father. No, I am your father. And so Darth Vader said this, right? And you can see here is be verb. If we look at that, that's the verb. The auxiliary is am. It's the spelling change. You can actually see that change, right? It would have been weird if he said, I be your father, more like a pirate, Darth Vader. But Darth Vader knows his auxiliaries, and so he used the correct form. I am your father. Okay? You can see here, that it's just truth. Even though Luke didn't believe it, he was telling him the truth. Okay? The bird is beautiful. I write that one because I see a lot of birds around my house, and the bird is beautiful. That's just truth. You could be looking at the bird at that time and just make a general statement about the truth. Colorful. So the bird is beautiful. The roads are full of potholes. That's around here. That's really common, especially in the spring, before they fill the potholes, holes in the road. When you're driving your car, your wheel goes in them, makes a big bang. That's called a pothole, okay? The roads are full of potholes. That's just true. I can see some right now outside my house. And so you can see, again, with the blue for are because of the E, right? This is the verb be, just like with is. And then you change it to the auxiliary, right, to get the the spelling I-S-A-R-E. But it has the same meaning, right? Life, general truth about life, or about your life, someone's life, or just the world around you. For past be, auxiliary verb, it's the same as did do. So if you remember from the other video, we're talking about past life or general truth. Okay, so truth about the past in some way, but it's finished. It's still true today, but it's finished. So it's not happening anymore. So for example, my friend was here. It's not here anymore, but it was true 2 hours ago. My friend was here. Okay, again, what's the verb? It's be. The auxiliary is the spelling change, W-A-S. And so all the rules apply that we just talked about before. You want to make it negative. You want to make the question. And it's the same for all of them. If you want to make it negative, you put the not. If you want to make the question, you move it. Now remember, be verb, be auxiliary verb is very special. And once you join it together, you cannot take them apart. And so they move together. So it's almost like we should draw both arrows, blue and red. You're kind of moving both of them. Okay? The dogs were asleep. Now, I don't have dogs, but I have friends who have dogs, and when you go over to their house, if you surprise them, this might be true. You knock on the door, the dogs wake up, they bark. They could say, oh, the dogs were asleep, right? That's past truth, but it's finished, right? And again, negative joins with the auxiliary, were. The verb is be, don't forget. The auxiliary is were, and when you move them, to create the question, you're moving both at the same time because you cannot separate these two, okay? And then another last example, the rule was a problem. And so you could be talking about an old rule, maybe from your teacher or from your work, and you can say the rule was a problem, but we changed it, right? So it's the truth about that in the past. And so when you look at meaning, it's very similar to did do and do. They kind of go together, okay? And actually it is, in your grammar books, they would call this simple present and simple past. They would actually put them together. But I like to separate them a little bit, and so do your books actually, because just the grammar is just a tiny bit different, okay? But remember, it's still following the same rules. You have the verb, which is be. You have the perspective, which is life truth in the present or life truth in the past, which changes the spelling. I am, is or are, okay, was, were, and that represents the meaning or the perspective, okay? So this is be auxiliary verb. So I hope that helps you understand how this fits into the system, and I hope it helps you understand the meaning of it a little better and why it works like this. If you like the video and you do think it's helpful, don't forget to give me the like and subscribe maybe and share it with your friends. And of course, if you ever have any questions or you want me to do some more examples of any of the things that I'm doing, or you want me to do a grammar question that you're having trouble with personally, just put it in the chat. Make a comment, and I can look into it for the future. But until then, thank you very much for joining me today, and have a great day.